this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Arlie, and we're going to talk about her book, The Outsourced Self. Internet Life in Market Times, and you're going to define what outsourced was.
Outsourcing is when you're paying someone to do something that, let's say 30 years ago, you didn't pay somebody to do. If, for example, a young person was looking for a partner 30 years ago, there would be church socials, there would be after-school meetups, there would be family or friend dinners where you might meet somebody. Today, it's more likely that someone would put down some money and join Match.com. In fact, for a in the first chapter of The Outsourced Self, I described the story of a 49-year-old woman who was divorced, had a 12-year-old, and was lonely. And 30 years ago, she wouldn't have outsourced this task of finding someone, but she said, look, you know what, time is getting on, and I'm going to bite the bullet and do this. And so the story gets to the heart of the matter in The Outsourced Self, because it's of a very nice love coach and a very efficient service and a very nice person using it. So we're not talking about any issue with the people involved. But what happens is that in the course of doing this, she's introduced to a way of thinking about herself and a way of thinking about others that is market-like, and she is called to draw a line between herself and that market way of thinking. For example, the love coach says to her, well, you know, looking for someone romantic is work. She says, I'm an engineer, I'm used to hard work. So don't think of it as something fun, it's work, okay? And then he said, you're going to have to brand yourself. She said, oh my goodness, brand myself. Yes, and it has to be true, it has to be real. A brand is a slice of the real you. So brand yourself. Okay, yes. And he's saying this is the world's largest love mall. And so you have to realize you have a market value, 1 to 10. You're getting on in years, so you're a 5 or a 6, and there are a lot of 3 men looking for 9 or 10 women, just so you know. And she said, well, he's trying to help me. This is how it is. Yes. And then he said you have to really be mindful of ROI, return on investment. And she says, okay, yes. And then there comes a time when she meets Mr. Wrong, and they have a relationship, and 6 months later they break up by mutual agreement, and he doesn't get along with her daughter, nor does the daughter like him. And that man says to her as he goes out the door, you were so easy to find, I'm going to find someone just like you. And at that point, she drew a kind of a mental line. She wanted to use Match.com as a paid tool to enter a very human relationship with a person. But part of the tool had entered into the relationship because this young man, and he might have been a very nice person, but he'd begun to think of her in a market-like way. She said, I felt like a box of cereal. And he wanted to go back into the Safeway and pick a box exactly like me, only another box of the same thing, that I was a generic commodity. And it was at that point that she said, we have to draw a line. And each time we draw a line, what we're doing, this is why I think this is so important. Each time we draw a line, we're deciding what to be emotionally attached to and what to be emotionally detached from. She did the same drawing of line with regard to an act. What act was hers and what wasn't? This love coach said, well, look, I will help you brand yourself. He did. I will help you write your profile, okay? I will help you pick your photograph, okay? I will help you decide what to say, online and off. And then he said, would you like me to scan the replies that you're getting online from your exposure of your profile? And at that point, she drew the line. She said, no, only I can do that, because when I meet the man of my dreams with whom I'll spend a future, I want to be able to say to him, I chose you. So where we put our signatures, where we remain emotionally attached to an act, when so much of it is now in market, becomes a very important, invisible, hidden, emotional work that I think we're doing when we're living our intimate lives in market times.
You're reminding me to a certain extent of places like Britain, where all the kids are sent off to schools, not realizing that whoever raises the kid will become.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing that kept going through my mind as you're talking about this outsourcing and this kind of dispassionate and anonymous kind of process. There is an impact to all of this.
Yes, there is.
You talked about the husband and wife who outsourced the pregnancy, the fertilized egg, to a surrogate mother from India. That all has influence on who that child is going to become.
Yes.
It's not something like just a repository and plunk it there, 9 months later come back, pick it up, and away you go.
Right. That is true and there's 2 chapters of The Outsourced Self, which are about the couple, the infertile couple that go to this small clinic in Anand, Gujarat in India to pay a surrogate to carry a fertilized egg from the wife and the husband, which is implanted into the surrogate. And they're going to India because they can't afford to hire a commercial surrogate in California, for example, where it would be $30,000 you would pay the surrogate. They're going to India because it's just $3,000. But what haunted me was not the fact of one woman carrying a baby for another. That could be part of a gift exchange. That could be part of an enormously important kind of gift that one person gives another. But in this instance, this couple knew virtually nothing about the surrogate. They met her for half an hour at this clinic in a little waiting room. The surrogate spoke Gujarati. The couple spoke English. They had an awkward 20-minute, half an hour conversation. And at the end of that conversation, the man said, well, the surrogate seemed so very shy, and her husband, who was also in the interview, very shy. And we didn't really have much to speak about. And now I don't remember what her name was. Don't know who she came from, where she came from. And when I interviewed the surrogates, who very poignant situation here, they didn't know where the couple for whom they were carrying a child came from. One surrogate said to me, this is very typical, oh, they come from far away. They must be very posh. Which would be the English translation of sort of English, very posh, very rich, and from far away. And that says much as they knew. They wished that they had a closer relationship with the client. And this Ashanksha clinic that I visited was like the world's largest baby farm. And the head of that clinic was very proud. We have the most babies that are born here, and people come to us from all over the world, and demand is high. She wanted to keep quality control, so that she put the surrogates in a a dormitory for 9 months where husbands were not allowed to visit. They were not supposed to have sexual intercourse because that might introduce problems, venereal diseases. So fed them vitamins, and they weren't really allowed to, and very seldom did, even with permission, venture away for that period of time. But even within that situation, there was a more humane and a less humane way to be a surrogate, a commercial surrogate, and this was for a for-profit clinic. And in one case, the surrogate that I interviewed was carrying a child for an Indian client whom she got to know. She said, well, the woman I'm caring for is my big sister, I'm the little sister, I'm going to see the baby from time to time. She gave me a sari, we did ceremonies together. There was a human connection. And she felt, this is the main point, that the surrogate herself felt, I gave this woman a gift. This was my baby and her husband's baby, but I gave her a gift. In other instances, the surrogate was so alienated from her own womb, which she was instructed to think of as a carrying basket, as a case, a suitcase, not connected to herself, that the baby became like a commodity. One surrogate was Hindu, was employed by a Sikh couple from Canada, and the Sikh couple said, we want you to go to a Sikh temple so the embryo and evolving baby can hear the recitation of sacred scriptures. And they hired a maid to make sure that the surrogate went to the temple. And so the surrogate, it was as if the baby had already been bought. This was a Hindu woman carrying a Sikh baby that didn't, quote, belong in some monetary and existential sense to her. But at the very end, she said, but secretly, after I got out of the Sikh temple, I said Hindu prayers to the baby myself. I thought, great, but all of this brings to the fore ideas we've had about alienation and estrangement. And if we're moving into an everything for sale world, it's not that we take this lying down. It's like we have to do this peculiar work of keeping personal work personal, personal life personal, and to prevent ourselves from becoming alienated. So the point of the outsourced self is to say, look, this isn't everybody now, but if you look a short 3 decades back, so many things were not for sale. We're simply part of community life and family life that now are part of the market. You can hire someone to find your loved one, to there's a proposal arranging business to make the marriage proposal. There's the wedding planners. There are the baby namers, the potty trainers, the birthday party planners, on all the way to elder care managers, not just elder care workers, but managers who will decide where grandma should go for you, and Shiva sisters that will help you grieve, and then someone to tend the grave. And it's mainly the middle class at this point that's hiring these people, but I think of the middle class as the canary in the coal mine, is the one that is raising the issue of what happens when so much of personal life, personal facts, personal knowledge, personal acts, personal contexts is now in the hands of the market. And that seems to me a very important issue, because I think we're in the middle of a perfect storm. You have not just the 19th century elite that's hiring out, but middle class people that really have real needs for services. And laminated onto those real needs is a kind of a social anxiety, because the social class system is up for grabs. We're moving from a middle class society to an hourglass one, and people are anxious that they not fall down the class ladder. And at the same time, jobs are uncertain, more so than 30 decades back. So this is a perfect storm. There are new needs, new social class out there that has these needs, new social anxiety about those needs, and there's an elimination of alternatives to the market. We don't live with public services. There's a great denigration of anything the government does. So we don't get to live as much of Europe does, with paid parental leave, for example, with shorter hours of work, with great public preschool and schooling. So we can't turn to the public sector, and we can't turn to the old-time community either. So the alternatives to the market are disappearing, and the market is growing. And there's one third factor that makes this the perfect storm. We're living over the last 3 decades in a political climate that heroizes the market, denigrates anything else. And we've seen the privatization of prisons, of schools, now of parks and libraries. So there's a kind of a move to put much of the public realm, civic realm, into the market. And this looks to me like one step more. Well, let's put private life into the for-profit sector
But it
too.
seems like there's a
Perfect storm.
Yeah, there's a confluence of factors. One of them, as you said, is the loss of the village life, the community, the neighborhood. And so people have real needs that aren't being met. Need for community, of sharing, of someone to help them deal with the different questions that they have in their life.
Yes.
And that seems a real loss.
Yes. I just learned about a new service called Social Susan, which helps you find friends online for a price if you're, say, new to an area. And at first I thought, well, terrific. This is a new way of finding friends, of getting the community we lack. Then I began to think twice, because on the one hand, if you walk down the street, everyone's on their cell phone and not looking at you. If you stop to sit in a park, everyone's on their cell phone and not looking at you. If you go to a restaurant, everyone's on the cell phone and not looking at you. So it's really hard to make friends if you're looking to make friends, because even that very first act of looking you in the eye or saying hello or nice day has disappeared. So there's a kind of almost a unconscious, no one person's responsible for it, disappearance of that first act of making friends from the public realm. So that's a kind of a takeaway. And then there's a kind of a give back. Now you can pay for a service that through the internet will get you a local friend. But there's a new language in that service. It said an efficient way to find a friend, good ROI in finding a friend. And then it also says that you want to be put in the company with people who are really committed to finding a friend. And what's the emblem of commitment? That they've paid. That means they really want a friend, is because they've paid. But then they must be motivated to find a friend. Well, is that the sign we want of commitment in a desire to find a friend? I think it's more a social class filter. And finally, they say it's very good to sign up to our service, because if you want to sell something and you're looking to market a product, well, what better way to find friends? So you would be put in the company of people that are trying to sell you something, and maybe just sell to each other. Who knows who joins this thing? It's all new, And in a way, that's what the outsourced self is doing. It's looking at what can become a big trend. It hasn't hit everybody. I mean, Facebook, for example, it's 11% of the world's population are on Facebook. And that's not everyone, but hey, a short 10 years ago, nobody was on it. So I'm just trying to give in this book a heads up where I think the social trends are aligned such that they're pointing us in this direction. And you could say, well, this only hits the affluent, and you'd be right mainly. Although poor people eat out, for example, as often as rich people do, but they eat out at different, cheaper places. But this is just as important for poor people as it is for rich, because if we're all moving into an everything for sale world, and if market culture comes with many of these for sale services, poor people are doubly out. For the outsourced self, I did a survey of California residents, and I compared rich to poor, and I discovered two things. One is that poor people want these services more than rich people do.
I thought that was very...
What a paradox, that the people that can't afford it are the ones that want it the most, and the ones who can afford it want it less. And the reason for that is that poor people have less community, helpful community, than rich people do. I asked one question: do you agree or disagree with this statement, that you can't always count on family and friends, but you can always count on money to get what you want or get what you need? And poor people were far more likely to answer yes, that's true, than were rich people. So if we're moving into an everything for sale world, public services, and now even private life outside of the market, you're really hitting poor people doubly. You're taking their social citizenship away from them because they can't fall back on community, helpful community, in the way that middle class people can.
There was another thing that really was disturbing about the invisible people. And this process has a way of making people invisible.
Yes.
And that's just really troubling. That in full of our arrogance of, I want that, I want that, I want that, and it's all about me, you're not thinking about the impact on the other people that you're buying it from.
Yes.
And it doesn't to you, but apparently that doesn't matter. It's what you want, and if you have the money to buy it, there's no question about that.
And there's a general ideology that, hey, this is something we're choosing, and if you have mutually beneficial transactions in the marketplace, why not? And for much of life, we need the market, and the market is great. The whole point here is to focus the reader on the balance between the market and everything else. We're used to looking for balance in the government between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch. But what we're not looking at is the balance between the market and everything else. And that balance is altering our emotional life. And that's why I think this is important, that we're having to develop new rules of engagement, and that those new rules of engagement are, in a way, indicate that we're trying to regulate capitalism from the inside, because it's not regulating itself, and it's leaving, as you're emphasizing, a whole stratum of people out of the whole story. So I guess that also, I learn from stories, and in the outsourced self,
really
I tell a lot of them.
Thing.
It's how, yeah, they're almost just so stories. I learn from people, and give you one example of what gets not noticed, and how we get taken over in a way by a for-profit world. I interviewed a man who said he worked very long hours, he traveled a third of the time. He had 3 wonderful daughters, and the youngest of whom was coming up for a birthday. And he looked left and right, and his daughter's friends all had parents who hired birthday party planners. And he thought, oh, this is absurd, this is silly, this is going too far. He drew the line, going too far. You don't outsource the preparation of a birthday party to somebody else. That's something a good father does. So he started himself to plan the party. He sent out the invitations, he blew up the balloons, he put pinned the tail on the donkey up on one wall. In came 8 little 5-year-old girls, and the party began. Things were going fine. But he had the idea that there should be an entertainer, an idea he got from the fact that there were services in the neighborhood that had entertainers. So he thought, well, I will dress up as Crocodile Dundee. So he got a great big 10-gallon hat and boots, and he began stalking up and down in front of an array of 5-year-old girls. And he began talking about wrangling crocodiles and how you do that, and then he moved to kangaroos and to koala bears, and then he ran out of things to say. And all these restless little 5-year-olds began to wiggle, and then because they were used to being organized by a planner, they fell apart into chaos. And so all the parents who were ringing around the room had to put down their glass of white wine and sort of get into action and make people create order out of chaos. And then a neighbor came up to this father and said, Michael, get real. The experts know how to plan these birthday parties better than you. Experts know what 5-year-olds think is funny. So now that piece of information, what your 5-year-old thinks is funny, her ticklebone, is now in the hands of an expert to know. And you, the father, you just have to dial in and get an expert that knows what your kid will laugh at. That became the idea. And he had said, no, I don't need an expert. After the neighbor gave him this humiliating evaluation, he changed his mind. Yes, the expert knows better than I do. I really don't know what makes my daughter laugh or her friends, so I give up. So he redrew his line.
Well, thank you for being on.
Well, thank you.